And here now, Tammy Bruce, Washington Times columnist and radio talk show host. She is also a Fox News contributor. And Dr. Wendy Osefo, political commentator and professor at Johns Hopkins University. Good to see you both. Tammy, I'll start with you. How is it that you and me and Wendy and everybody else in America tonight are paying for the lousy behavior of a few on Capitol Hill?
Well, look, this is the government. This is where you've got a lot of power, of course, a lot of influence, and a lot of money. Congress always, all they spend is money that's not their own. Why would they decide to spend their own money in this regard? We see this as the kind of course, whether they waste our money or in this kind of a case, protect themselves using it. But I do find it rather amusing that suddenly everyone in Congress, or a few at least, are really outraged about the fact that this has been going on. This has been going on since at least 1995. So they know that this is how it's been 20 years. What was suddenly wrong with using taxpayer money versus 10, 20 years ago when they knew it was happening? All of this, though, is, I think, a little bit of faux outrage. Congress, we know, of course, does not take its responsibility seriously, let alone when it comes to their own misbehavior. It's always about pushing it off or ignoring it, whether it's ethics committees, things that will never really occur, because they don't see themselves as being under the same umbrella of law and order and responsibility as the rest of us.
Well, this is just bizarre. I mean, you're talking about $17 million, Wendy, that has gotten paid out to settle these sexual harassment claims, and they're settled, and the American taxpayer knows nothing about it. It kind of feels like a free pass for these guys.
Absolutely, it does feel like a free pass, but what we're looking at here is a systemic issue of power and privilege within our society. Whether we're looking at Conyers, we're looking at Franklin, we're looking at Moore or George H.W. Bush, these are men who have been accused of sexual misconduct. But this is what's really important here. The chambers has continued to look at their harassment policies, and we as taxpayers should say we need to put in checks and balances in that harassment policy that speaks to issues like this, because what can no longer happen is taxpayers can no longer continue to bankroll sexually predatory behavior by officials which we elected. That has to stop today.
Well, you know, look, they're talking about putting in classes. It seems to me kind of amazing that anybody needs a class in this stuff, but that's where we are today. And you know what? We have corporations all over the United States of America, Tammy, that have these classes, and they have this kind of training so that they hopefully don't have stuff like this happen, but we know it happens.
Yes.
Will the classes make a difference on Capitol Hill?
You know, it only happens when there's a desire systemically to make a difference. Look, these are the people in Congress, remember, are some of the richest people in America. They've done other kinds of work. $300 million one member is worth. These are not newbies in life. They know what the rules are. Classes don't tell you the difference between right and wrong. You have a sense of integrity and dignity, and you know how to treat women. That becomes the issue. Why is it, and it is systemic, I agree with my sister here on the other side, that this is a cultural dynamic, and you notice when there's unlimited power and money, like in Hollywood, like in journalism, and, of course, in Congress. It's interesting, isn't it? When you have billions of dollars and extraordinary power, but it's also in other industries at different kinds of levels. But as a society, this conversation has to happen so that other women know that you are not alone, and so that men who have thought, because it has been normal for so long, that maybe this is just normal life. I think a lot of men are getting an education that it's not normal any longer.
Important that that happens. It's important for every woman in America. It's important for every man in America and any father of daughters. I've got two little girls myself, and I think I want to make sure that they, when they go into the workforce, don't have to experience any of that I keep hearing about. Let me ask you about this one. Al Franken, Wendy, he's not going to resign. He's not going anywhere. In fact, he wants to convince everyone in Minnesota that he should be elected again, despite. Can we show the photo again? I mean, this is so disgusting what he did to a woman who is sound asleep. You see it there. I don't want to describe it. You see it. Wendy, why won't he back off now? Why won't he say, yeah, you know, I did some really bad stuff and I'm going to resign?
Well, this goes to that behavior again, this sense of entitlement. He's not going to resign, and I actually heard a retort that said, well, if he resigns, then other people who've been accused should resign. It's going back to this, like, elementary school behavior where it's like, no, you do it, no, you do it. And quite frankly, this is a bigger issue. This is about misconduct. This is about women. But let me say something here that's really important. Even though, so far he's had two women who have given back the money that he's helped them raise within their campaign, history has shown us that when men who are in these positions of power do something, it doesn't necessarily tank their career. Bill Clinton had an approval rating between 34 and 62% before his impeachment proceedings. After the hearings, his approval rating went up to 74%. It was a historical high. So, I mean, Al Franken is not just one person who's done this. We've seen this time and time again. But we have to, again, start putting in checks and balances to say that once this behavior is done, you have no option. It's not up to you whether you resign.
If I could add to on the Clinton point, is that the fact that he was lauded and embraced after that, and that the media and the Democratic Party raised him up and saying this is no real big deal, it's private behavior. This is the chickens coming home to roost. It sent that message over the last generation that this, if you put out enough messages about the feminist agenda or women's rights, you can then do whatever you want, effectively ruining individual women's lives in the name of the collective. And I think most of us now are rejecting that notion.
Yeah, well, it's such a shame.
Absolutely.
I never understood it at the time. I consider myself a feminist, and I've always been proud of that.
Trish.
But they have taken that term and they've turned it into something else. And the idea that so-called feminists would come to Bill Clinton's defense and allow that young woman to be tarred and feathered the way she was, that's just wrong. Anyway, good to see you both tonight. Thank you very much. An important discussion indeed. Up next.
And President Trump renewing his call for the travel ban and border wall after the mosque attack that killed more than 300 people in Egypt. He also tweeted this: "The world cannot tolerate terrorism. We must defeat them militarily and discredit the extremist ideology that forms the basis of their existence." Exclamation point. Joining me now is our Asia analyst, Gordon Chang. He's the author of Nuclear Showdown: North Korea Takes on the World. Always great to have you here, Gordon.
Thanks, Laura.
So obviously we've got a lot to digest with what has happened over these last few days. So as we watch this horrific situation in Egypt unfold, 305 people dead in this. It is so hard to look at this story, to think about the children. Let's just start with, what do you think about President Trump's tweets on this?
I think he was absolutely correct when he talked about militarily defeating the terrorists. Egyptian President El-Sisi actually talked about the same thing. He said, what we need to do is use brute force. In the Pentagon, they talk about winning hearts and minds and 3 cups of tea, but the terrorists obviously believe that this is a military matter. They're using guns and explosives, and we should view it in the same way. Now, we defeated in large measure ISIS in the sense of taking their caliphate and shrinking it to really a very small portion of Syria and Iraq. And now these terrorists are going all over the place, and because of that, you have the incidents like the one in Egypt. But over time, I think that the ISIS is going to lose its allure because it lost militarily at Raqqa and Mosul and other places.
Right. And, as we do track the movements and actions of ISIS overseas, at times it seems as though things might be kind of settling down in some regard. But then you have this event that happened, and you mentioned losing their footing in Raqqa. We've got the mosque attack. So what do you think the real story is? In terms of the numbers and the power and the strength that is going on right now with ISIS, where are we really?
Well, I think that we're winning, but obviously this is something where you can't declare final victory because you no longer have that big caliphate. You no longer have what looks like a nation state. This threat is going to metastasize. You're going to see fighters spreading not only through Egypt and the Levant and also Europe and the United States, but these are not going to have the same force. People will die, and that's, of course, something that we're going to try and prevent. But nonetheless, ISIS is not going to have that same allure. And when it doesn't have that allure, the attacks, I think, will eventually shrivel.
We watch these tweets, we watch the news, we listen for the words of the president. And when we hear things like he wants to crush terrorists with military means, What does that look like in terms of military personnel, placement, and the weapons? What exactly are we talking about when we see those words?
Yeah, I think what it means is we're going to have more military personnel in Syria. You know, there's a dispute as how many we have there now, maybe as many as 7,000. That number may have to go up. We're going to have to do these things. You know, in 2014, in January, when President Obama said that ISIS was the JV, you know, and we had reduced our footprint in Iraq, well, ISIS became a real threat. They actually established a caliphate. It looked like it had a lot of territory, controlled a lot of money, oil and the rest of it, and it was only through military action that we were able to shrink that along with the countries that we're working with. So unfortunately, we're going to have more people there. You know, we don't want to do that. That's politically unpopular, but we see what happens when presidents do politically popular things. These threats grow.
Right. And in terms of how this is playing out overseas, how do you think the president's words on terrorism is playing out? When he condemned the mosque attack, he reiterated that the United States will continue to stand with Egypt in the face of terrorism. How does that translate into action? How is it perceived around the world?
In Egypt, I'm sure it's going to be taken very well. In Saudi Arabia, another friend, it will be taken well. Countries like Iran are not going to like it. You know, they fuel some of this terrorism with their links with Hezbollah. So, you know, if you're not a friend of the U.S., you're not going to like the president's tweet. You know, a lot of people would like to see this thing as being sort of, you know, we do this by making sure that people love us. Well, unfortunately, that's not the way to deal with this. The way to deal with this is to win on the battlefield. You kill the enemy, you capture them, or you force them into retirement. That's an unfortunate reality, but that's the way it is.
What was your reaction when you first saw the news on the mosque? When you woke up, when we all woke up and we heard what happened and we saw the numbers begin to rise and to this great number of over 300?
Yeah, it's horrific, and we never get used to it,
Right.
Regardless of what happens, because you see the children and the rest of it. This is just something that is going to shake us to our core as long as it continues.
It has to stop.
Has to stop.
It has to stop. Well, hopefully we will have some sort of resolution. We will have, you know, some answers here as we move forward with this unfortunate story. Gordon Chang, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks, Laura.
Appreciate it.